Today we're going to learn about the principles of design. Now, you can learn more about the principles of design, and if you have questions, you can look that up online. There are a lot of different things out there that you will find. Sometimes they use different principles of design for things such as graphic design, visual art, logos, things like that. There are several different areas, but these are the principles of design that I want you to know. So if you do go look up more information about it, make sure you're actually finding the correct information. So I'm going to go ahead and mute myself, or not mute myself. I'm going to go ahead and hide myself here, and then we are going to continue this little presentation. So if you need to take notes, I highly advise that. Again, I will make sure to point out the term followed by what it is, and then I will show you some examples. These are very important for you to know. So the first thing are the principles of design are the ways that the artist uses the elements of art to create a good composition. And again, a composition simply means an artwork or their layout. Now, the principles of design are tools that use the elements. So the elements of art are the things that, like color or line, texture, shape, space. Those are the actual items that we use in art. So for example, if I said color, well, that would be like the actual paint that I'm putting onto the surface. The principles of design tell me where that paint would best be used in contrast and things, such as where they go in comparison to other colors. So a nice way that I like to compare this to is imagine that the elements of art are the materials to make a cake. So that would be like eggs, that would be flour, sugar, all the actual items that make a cake. Don't forget, we would also have like a stove, basically everything we need to make the cake. But without having a recipe, we wouldn't know what to do with those items, and we wouldn't know how much of them to use. So the principles of design are the recipe for making good art. So in other words, if I were baking a cake and you told me, hey, a cake needs eggs and flour and sugar, well, you didn't tell me how much. So I'm going to bake a cake with 36 eggs, 1 cup of flour, and a dump truck full of salt. That wouldn't be a cake. It wouldn't be anything. So in order to make a cake, one must follow a specific recipe to get the cake. And again, just like art, I could give you all the paint in the world, and it doesn't mean it's going to make a good painting. You have to follow the recipe to actually end up with a good composition. So again, the principles of design are that compositional recipe. Now, the 11 principles of design that I want to make sure that we talk about are balance, emphasis, unity and harmony, rhythm, pattern, contrast, variety, proportion, movement, and repetition. So I think one of the easiest ones is balance, because your brain already sees if something is in balance. And what balance means is just like you would think of when you walk or stand on like a curb to balance yourself. It means visual weight. So what we want to do is talk about, is there visual weight on the left side, on the right side, and at the top and the bottom that equal each other out? There are 3 types of balance. We have asymmetrical balance. Asymmetrical balance simply means that whatever's on the one side is still balanced by the right, but they're not identical objects. So imagine for asymmetrical balance that I'm on a teeter-totter and I weigh 300 pounds. On the other side of the teeter-totter, we need something to weigh 300 pounds, but it's not just one person. We could have 3 100-pound people, and they would still balance out the 300-pound person on the other side, but they're not identical shapes or forms, I should say. Again, we would have 1 on one side and 3 on the other, but they still make balance. That's asymmetrical. Symmetrical balance means that things on the left are equal to things on the right. Even though they may not look identical, they hold the same visual weight and they basically look the same. So again, in this scenario, if I was a 300-pound person and now I am sitting in a hot pink tracksuit and I am sitting on the left of the teeter-totter, on the right of the teeter-totter is another person that's 300 pounds and they are wearing a black tracksuit. it does not mean that we are totally different. We are pretty much the same, even though we have different tracksuits on. Now, the color is totally different, so it might actually mess with our visual weight for terms of a symmetrical balance, but in general, our physical balance is the same. So to achieve symmetrical balance, we are still 300 pounds on both sides, but now we're both in black tracksuits, so we look almost identical. Even though our faces might be a little different or our hair might be a little different, in general, you see two very large people in black tracksuits on a teeter-totter. That would be symmetrical balance. Essentially, I could fold the picture in half, and they're pretty much the same on both sides. Radial balance is a style that comes from, I like to use the word radiate or radiation. So understand that it's a balance that kind of radiates out from a central focal point, so like a spiral. It does not have to be round, though. A lot of people see radial and they think radius, round. It can be, it often is, but it doesn't mean it has to be. It more means that it radiates outward, like it's pulsing out, like the sun radiates out, or like radiation would radiate outward. So let's take a look at these. So this type of balance here is going to be what type? So we divide it in half, and we can see that both sides look pretty much the same. Now, again, it is a slight difference, but I would put this into the area of symmetrical balance. Now here we have Whistler's mother. This type of balance is asymmetrical. Again, if we fold it in half, we don't have another lady counterbalancing the weight over here, as we did in the poppies. What we actually have is this black curtain counterbalancing her over here. And she's also so offset that it balances that out. But again, we have a totally different large black object on the left to counterbalance her in black on the right. This is asymmetrical balance. This is the rose window of Notre Dame. This is radial balance. You can notice the focal point feels like it's in the center here, and it radiates out. It's exploding from the center. All right, so what type of balance do you think this is? Again, let's go through and decide. If we were to fold it down the middle, which I drew this line, we don't have identical things on both sides. So again, this is a form of asymmetrical balance. All right, how about this picture of Frida Kahlo? Here, we have a line down the middle, and we have this black cat on one shoulder and this black monkey on the left. They're not identical, but they hold the same visual weight, and therefore, this would be symmetrical. Next, we have contrast. Contrast simply means the difference in two things. We can have low contrast and high contrast. Again, high contrast would be like a solid black and white image, not an actual black and white photograph, but actually like a zebra where it's just black or white. Whereas low contrast, we'd have a lot of gray in there. So again, contrast doesn't just mean black versus white. It means everything from color. It means everything from, you could have zigzag lines versus curvy lines. It simply means opposites. So here we have a high form of contrast, and I know it's a little blurry, but we have our white versus black, which also causes our eye to move. So this is an area of high contrast. Here we have contrast in colors. So a lot of the contrasting colors that you should already know from a color wheel means that they are opposite the color wheel. So if you look at violet, on the other side of violet, we have yellow. And here we can see where yellow and violet, or purple in this case, it's a lighter, but they are paired together, creating a sense of contrast. If you know what the opposite of blue is, it is orange. And here we have a small sliver of orange paired with blue. Contrasting colors are sometimes easy to think about in terms of sports. Sporting teams oftentimes use contrasting colors, or if you think about a goalie in soccer, or basketball shoes, anywhere we're trying to grab someone's attention, we often use contrasting colors because they grab the eye. So if you think about teams like LSU or the Vikings, or you have the LA Lakers. These teams all use violet and yellow. Interesting enough, Lancaster City Schools used to actually be violet and yellow or violet and gold. But so many teams in the area were also violet and gold that they had to change the colors. And if you think about it, there are tons of teams around our city that use violet and gold. Again, we also have red and green are opposites. They are contrasting. So think, what do you do at a stoplight? You stop. What do you do when it changes to green? You go. So again, going and stopping are also in contrast, and the colors they use are identical, red and green, to represent that. Emphasis. Emphasis means where you look first. It's the spot where you want the focal point to be. That means that's where that person's going to look. So in this case, the focal point is going to be this large, darker circle. And a focal point, basically what stands out, what causes it to stand out in this case is, one, it's very large, it's very dark, it's very different. So focal point, when you get someone to look at it, and again, this is in my opinion, this is a Kandinsky, but this is kind of a poor example because I like to talk about the rule of thirds or the Fibonacci spiral, and we've talked about that in class. And we talk about where the hot spots are for your eye to fall on a composition. And that's typically where, in my opinion, we should put our focal point or our emphasis, because that's that spot where the person is going to start their journey and move their eye throughout our work. So here, I think this one's a little better in my opinion, or it's a lot better. But here we have a focal point. So again, the focal point is obviously right here. Okay, and if we look at that, we have all these different cues for our brain to know where to look. One, everything is darker except this light area, creating contrast for a focal point. Two, all of these soldiers are aiming guns at the focal point, which causes our eye to look at it. The arrows that are created by, and again, triangles, just like the arrow I kind of put on the screen here, they cause our eye to look. And if you notice, his arms are outstretched like this. That creates an arrow pointing directly down at his head. The actual soldiers and their heads line up perfectly with the weapons, and it creates another arrow. So again, we have arrows all over this work telling us where to look, as well as the light and dark. Variety is what we use when we use different elements, and we use them in a way that creates an interesting change to the work. So variety could be something as easy as a bunch of straight lines and then a few jagged lines that would create interest in the work. So it could also be something compared to size, anything that's using the elements in a different way versus the other elements. Again, it's not necessarily contrast, it's not exact opposites, it's just a slight change to create an interesting design. So again, here we have the Kandinsky. And we can talk about what variety we have here. And if we talk about something as simple as shapes, we have circles versus squares versus triangle shapes. Again, we could talk about lines, where we have straight lines versus curvy lines. We could talk about a variety of color. All of these things create a more interesting composition. Unity and harmony. So unity and harmony is similar to variety, but the other direction. What that means is that we are using the elements in a manner of repeated design. So again, unity would necessarily be like colors. So instead of being different colors, we would want similar colors. So here we see a lot of unity in this work. It looks very muddy, it looks very blurred, but the work itself is meant to be unified. So the greens and the yellows are very similar in color, creating unity and harmony. Again, they're very soft. The sky even has like a hint of that green to it up in here. Proportion. Proportion simply means the relationship of one object to another within the artwork. And we've actually learned proportion when we've done measuring. So we've learned how to do ratio measuring when we draw. And proportions are things like your face is made up of proportions, such as your ears line up perfectly with your mouth on the bottom, and the eyebrow lines up perfectly with the top of your ear. You have 5 spots for eyes across your head, and your lips line up perfectly with the pupils of your eyes. Those are all proportions, and when we understand those, they help us to draw something. So we could also talk about proportions here. So we're looking at this, just a still life. And this artist used proportions in a way that tried to go for realism. So all of this is on a flat image. So all of these are actually in the same depth field. They're not actually further away or anything. So the artist had to draw certain things smaller or larger in comparison to scale. So again, one of the things that you often see artists do is hold a pencil up or their thumb, and they hold it out, they shut one eye, and they're kind of looking at things, moving their thumb around. And what they're doing is they're measuring proportion against something else. And again, we've done this when we've learned how to use basic shapes to draw. Here we have proportions that have been altered. They're definitely not realistic proportions. So we can see things like this kid is way out of proportion, but it's kind of done in a manner to grab your attention. However, proportion, so these are exaggerated proportions, but we also have proportion in terms of like the church back here or the mountain. So in general, if we look at this church and we look at the guy's head, they are almost the same size. But we know that they're not meant to be the same size in reality when we view them. Our brain says, oh, this is supposed to be a church. It's not a tiny, tiny proportional, building floating in the air. It's meant to look like it's back in the distance. So again, we can use proportion to give a sense of scale and depth. And again, that's pretty much proportion. Rhythm can be kind of confusing. Think of rhythm in terms of a beat to a song. So it's like a visual tempo that we follow through a work. So even though the work is visual that we're looking at, it still has a beat to it where we can almost like, tap our hand or nod our head in terms of how we move our eye through the work. So again, as we move our eye through this work, the rhythm of this almost comes out like a boom, 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 very basic rhythm. And again, the rhythm here is what is being repeated. So in this case, the element being repeated would be the shape of the fish. This is called a tessellation, like M.C. Escher made tessellations. They're repeated patterns that go on forever. And due to it being identical and just changing color, the rhythm of it feels very, just boom, 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 boom. It doesn't seem like anything else, but almost like a marching step. Movement. Movement is extremely important. So what movement does is it means two things. One, it could be kinetic movement, which means the work actually moves. That, if you own a lava lamp, technically that is a moving piece of artwork. If you ever had a mobile as a child, like babies have mobiles above their beds, that is a moving piece of artwork. Or if you have like a solar system hanging from your ceiling, that's a mobile. That is a moving piece of art. It's called kinetic art. However, most movement pertains to how our eye moves around the artwork. So, this picture came out blurry. So in Starry Night, we actually have a sense of movement through the sky. And I apologize that's so blurry. But again, we have this actual line here of movement, and it gives our sense of movement within the artwork. But it also can mean where our eye moves through the work itself. So as our eye moves through the work, I gotta go back. As our eye moves through the work, that is also movement. So we start with emphasis, and in this case, we're gonna start right here on this large black shrub. This is a tree, okay? So when our eye hits that emphasis area, and again, if you would put the grid on here, it's gonna line up perfectly, almost perfect on the whole way up with the vertical axis here. But our eye would follow this line or start here and move through the work. And as our eye moves, it's going to go to the next area, which is going to be here. From here, we can see that there is a rhythm or a pattern that can be followed from this moon, and it goes through here. And basically, when we talk about movement and an eye, we're talking about a circuit like electricity, because the real goal of the artist is to move your eye from one point all the way through to the next. And again, we want our eye to end up almost back where that first emphasis was so they can take another ride, almost like a roller coaster. And when you get done with the roller coaster, we want our viewer to say, hey, we want to go through it one more time, and they follow the line again and can kind of enjoy the art. Pattern is something that you probably already understand. It is just a repeating of the shapes, lines, or colors of the elements to create a decoration or ornament design. Most of you probably have a pattern on right now. Humans love pattern, okay? Pattern is something that is so important to us. It's why we survived as a human race, because we understood the seasons. So we knew how to plant. Something as basic as the seasons changing for harvest, but it comes all the way back down to art because pattern feels comfortable. We really enjoy it. It's calming. And again, we can do a lot with patterns. So again, look at your clothes. You're probably wearing a pattern. I know I am. So again, if we look at the pattern in here, we have all types of different patterns throughout the artwork. And again, a pattern really can be something as simple as repeating a line. Again, by using different patterns, we can also create emphasis and enhance an artwork. You can notice the frets on the guitar are black and white and very straight versus the background pattern, which is a zebra-looking pattern, which is a more curved but still black and white pattern. So the patterns are very similar in that they're both black and white, but they are totally different in style, and they enhance each other. But again, the fretboard itself would be a pattern. The dots on the fretboard, there would be patterns, even strings themselves. Here we have a repetition of these lines. So again, we have the line weight looking very, very thin, but the repeated element again are the lines or the circles at the bottom. Repetition means how the same elements are going to be used over and over and over. So very similar to what we just talked about. So here again, we have what repetition being repeated. So again, not just necessarily describing it, but what element. So in this case, we have the element of line being repeated and color. We have the element of shape being repeated. So again, very similar to what we just talked about. And I can understand if there's a slight confusion with repetition and pattern. That does make sense, but just know they're both very similar. So again, shapes, colors, lines, forms, all repeated. All right, so again, just to review, the principles of design, we have balance, emphasis, unity or harmony, rhythm, pattern, contrast, variety, proportion, movement, and repetition.